So can you hear me? Yeah, so I also work at IOG, so I'm also in the blockchain space. So today I will talk about privacy and accountability, and in particular about how the people that try to hold us accountable can also be held accountable. And so that topic, the whole topic of privacy by design, and kind of how to make sure that there is no kind of abuse by kind of centralized powers is very dear to me. To think about privacy, I kind of have these two pictures. One is like a tribal society, an egalitarian society, where everyone maybe knows each other, but if you want to be alone, you can go somewhere and have a private conversation. So there is kind of no power indifference. Maybe you don't have much privacy, it might be quite invasive, everyone knowing everything about you. So that's kind of one model. The other model is that of a big city where you can actually be private in a crowd. And that's kind of a system where there was only physical cash, there were no CCTV cameras, so like New York at the turn of the kind of last century, or the beginning of the previous century. So these are kind of two ways of privacy, and they're very different, but they are also very, very different from the kind of privacy that we have nowadays, which is very restricted mostly by our own habits and choices. We carry our phones with us, we are rarely offline. There's kind of a lot of data is collected about us. And so I think, and a lot of it is more and more centralized. So I think the goal of Ethereum, and I think that's a big vision, is to kind of create something that's more decentralized, more egalitarian. And I find that very appealing. So I spent a week offline last week, and I missed a lot of world events. So I think there was quite some politically important stuff happening. I'm still catching up to some extent. One of the things that happened is that Trump kind of pardoned the CEO of Silk Road, and I think that it's quite a controversial topic. And because I want to talk about kind of abuse resistance, law enforcement, and the like, it's probably quite relevant. So I asked my friends, ChatGPT and DeepSeek and Copilot, kind of how that. What lessons can be learned from Silk Road? And so came up with kind of 5 bullets, as I asked. And one is that it's an example for like the power of anonymity and privacy online in a way. So you can, using Tor and Bitcoin, you can create marketplaces. That obviously prevents a lot of regulatory challenges, because what happens on that marketplace is often illegal, and it's difficult to control. I think there were, obviously there was drugs on Silk Road, but there were also other things. You could hire hitman lists and trade organs if you if you need urgently an organ transplant. So there is a lot of complicated stuff there. It also highlights the difficulty of building such a thing. So in the end, the FBI didn't have too much trouble taking it down once they kind of zoomed in and got their hands dirty. So it also shows how difficult it is to actually secure such a thing. And it was quite a centralized system in the end. The founder, Ross Ulbricht, actually kept a lot of control to himself, and I think that also made the system vulnerable. It also showed that Bitcoin can be used for selling and buying things online, so you don't need a conventional banking system. And then again, we're back to ethical challenges and ethical considerations of how, in a decentralized world, we can make sure that we do things that we like and not too many things that we don't like. I also asked about about privacy in a complicated, volatile world. So privacy has different aspects. One is protection from surveillance. Let's see. Yeah, I can scroll here. And I think Edward Snowden showed that surveillance is a lot more prevalent than we thought earlier, and I think it's getting more and more problematic. It also provides safeguarding of personal freedom, so it's fundamental for that. It helps prevent abuse of power. So if you have privacy, much easier. If you don't have privacy, it's much easier to put you under pressure, and people that say uncomfortable truths can be targeted much easier. That also means that maintaining trust in institutions, it becomes harder. For instance, whistleblowing becomes more difficult, and in principle, and moreover, privacy is very important for freedom of speech. So in the internet that we have now, we used to have some amount of privacy. So if you are a hacker, or if you are like a very tech savvy, you can still create pseudonyms, and you can have multiple versions of yourself. You can still hide behind smokes and mirrors, but average people usually cannot do that. So it's, if you will be, not only will be known what kind of dog you are, but also what kind of dog food you like and so on. So there's very little privacy on the internet. And for those that kind of think, oh yeah, I have nothing to hide, I really like this saying by Edward Snowden, who is a person that didn't get pardoned last week, unfortunately, who said, what I quite like is that saying that you don't need privacy because you have nothing to hide is like saying that you don't need freedom of speech because you have nothing to say. So I think these two things are really quite connected. So in my research, I looked at privacy by design, how to build systems that kind of are private by design, and and we can think of an online like marketplace as an example. I take something maybe slightly less controversial, like a chat system, a secure chat system. Let's make one that is really privacy preserving. So the first is like we want to have privacy preserving service provisioning. So what would we want there? So it should be at least end-to-end encrypted. We want to have as little of plain text data online as possible. So end-to-end encryption is kind of one thing that we want for a chat system, and most chat systems like WhatsApp and Signal provide something like that. Next, we want to have traffic analysis assistance, so who is talking with whom. That is very privacy invasive. Metadata, it's used by the NSA to kill people, so metadata is often enough to find out and target people. So we want traffic analysis protection. So systems that can help there is Tor or NIM. There was a nice talk on NIM, which is a blockchain incentivized anonymous communication system. So that could be integrated, and indeed that's also something that Silk Road used. Then you might need privacy respecting data analytics. So you might have to compute on some private data. For instance, in a chat system to discover who is online or who are my friends also using the system. So you might have to perform some data analytics, and you want to do that in a privacy preserving way. Using trusted execution environments is, for instance, also another option. I think Signal has also been using that for managing contacts. Another aspect that I worked on quite a lot is anonymous payment and identity management. So these are systems like anonymous credentials or Zcash. So you can imagine in a chat system, you could integrate this with a payment system, and so you can not only talk with someone, but you can also send them money. And potentially you can do that across borders, so it becomes quite a powerful system. And that's when kind of the fifth leaf of a system that is often kind of not that easy to realize comes in, and that's abuse-resistant law enforcement. So for instance, you want to have age controls, you want to prevent abuse, hate speech, money laundering, trafficking, and so on. So there's a lot of bad things that can happen. And and that is probably one of the reasons why like truly global, fast, usable payment does not really exist. I think Facebook wanted to build such a thing at some point, but they couldn't get it really done. I think Bitcoin gets close, but again, it's not all that straightforward. I think this is I think in order to kind of get everyone together and build such a system, we have to also think about the abuse. And what I will talk about is one proposal to do this. Many of the kind of existing proposals often have the problem of trapdoors. So you have to find some party or the set of parties, and then the question is how many of them that you trust, and if they kind of collude, if they get compromised by a powerful actor, let's say a national government, then the system really becomes quite broken. And so that most security professionals are very much against that. And this is also shown in a debate around in the European Union and the UK around chat systems. And protecting, it's veiled under kind of protecting children online, but it's the online safety bill in the UK, which has passed, and the so-called chat control bill of protecting children online in the European Union, which hasn't passed. And I think it passing in the European Union would be quite problematic, because probably in the UK, a single country, it's not that easy to kind of implement this in a too draconian way, but if the European Union would do it, could go quite far. So that's, and what they want is really a backdoor, or client-side scanning, which is also quite problematic. So there has been a lot of academic work around finding suitable trade-offs between privacy and accountability. It really goes back to David Chaum, who invented anonymous kind of mixed networks and the like, and also anonymous credentials. And then there's been a lot of work by kind of myself and other people that are more serious, more important, I think, even like than me. So like Shafi Goldwasser, who is the kind of inventor of zero knowledge, has also thought about how to apply zero knowledge to accountability and secret courts. Then there's Matthew Green, a famous cybersecurity expert, who's looked at abuse-resilient law enforcement. Then I worked with Aggelos Giayas, also from IOG, on Paradise, which is a distributed and regulation-compliant CBDC, so a centrally banked digital currency system, but we also have shown how to bring the same regulation compliance to stablecoins and other decentralized systems. And last but not least, I developed with Anja Lisenskaya and other students, several students, a primitive called privacy preserving blueprints, which I want to talk about here. And what all of those works say is that privacy and accountability can coexist, and that what we kind of have to decide as a society is which kind of trade-offs do we want? What are we willing to accept? So towards that goal, I want to kind of set the stage and introduce different stakeholders. We have users, that's all of us. Then we have verifiers. These are kind of service providers. Could be a smart contract on Ethereum, for instance, that verifies credential showings and then decides whether a transaction is valid or not. And then we have the authority that wants to kind of regulate us. And what the authority says that in order to protect your children, I must see everything. Often that's kind of because that's the current state of the art. The police has access to like before, everything is in plain text. So they are not really willing to give that up too freely. Then verifiers need to satisfy kind of policies. They need to know who they're interacting with, potentially whether they are old enough and so on. But they have like a restricted set of business policies. So for instance, that users are older than 21, that they're coming from a certain country. While the auditor really wants to, for instance, see the social security number, so they exactly know who they're talking about and can kind of point to a certain database where all the actions of the user are recorded. So what's the user's position? It's often complacency, like what can I change as a single person? Ads and free stuff is good. I need to kind of move around in the world. And I also love my kids, so I cannot really object to those arguments either. But then kind of what happens is that, sometimes we cannot rely on our liberal democracies to be kind of completely stable. Sometimes bad things happen, and we want to actually do something that requires us to have privacy. So it kind of, we might well come to a point where we'll change our mind and say privacy is a human right, and now I really need it because I'm in trouble. So we have to kind of protect that as we go. And there is, like, Snowden has warned us. There's a cryptographer called Phil Wogaway who talked about the moral responsibility of cryptographic work, and he also makes that case very well. So what's our goal? So we want to kind of bring the different requirements of these different parties together and find a good trade-off. So we have the auditor who wants to investigate things. So now I abstract it out a little bit. So he has some information that he uses to investigate a case. Let's say he has a list of suspects. Let's call that list X. And he wants to hide that. So he doesn't reveal who is suspecting, otherwise they would kind of flee or hide themselves, stop running Silk Road, for instance, and it would be much harder to catch them. Then there are users who have attributes, and they want to keep those kind of attributes and their identity private when they're interacting with the verifier. And then we have the verifier which wants to check whether the user's attributes satisfy a policy P, and in addition, their kind of task is to help the auditor learn what he needs to know. So we model that using a function f. So we say the auditor should see f of xy, which is a public function of the private input of the auditor x and the private input of the user y. So that's kind of the functionality what we want to achieve. It's a form of kind of multi-party computation, non-interactive multi-party computation, because the user interacts with the verifier, and then there's a ciphertext that the auditor can use to learn f of xy. So as I said, the goal is to keep kind of x private to the auditor, so he has confidentiality for the investigation, and to keep y private to the user, so the user has privacy. And to strike the trade-off, we want to reveal f of xy. So here's an example. We have a list of user identities at the auditor that should be investigated. The transactions of those users, and only those users, should be traced. Then we have the function which reveals the identity of a user if the user is in the list of suspects, and otherwise no information is revealed. And so we can, using zero knowledge proofs, we can prove that that list is not too big, that all of those suspects actually were kind of issued a search warrant by a judge, and so on. So we can provide a lot of kind of accountability on top of this mechanism. So that's our contribution. So we have a new primitive for privacy and accountability. It's modeled after public key encryption, as we will see. And it integrates well with anonymous credentials, but also with like privacy coins like Monero or Zcash. So you can go there as well. We have a formal security notion and efficient instantiations. For certain functions, we have very efficient instantiations. For others, we kind of build on fully homomorphic encryption, so it's a bit less efficient. But also that, for instance, by Summer, they're also working on making that practical. And and on top of that, we also build many extensions and future work. So we have 2 more papers on the same subject. So this was published in Eurocrypt 2023, and I have some follow-up work that I will talk at the end if there's time. So that's the primitive. So that's the kind of the API of what a blueprint scheme gives you. So we have the auditor, which generates a key pair, a secret key and a public key. And the public key encodes in a hidden way the auditor's like investigation information, let's say the list of suspects, X. And that public key can be passed to the user. So the box always says this is encrypted, this is hidden from everyone. So X is like PK of X is given to the user. And the user now can use this public key to encrypt his identity information and create the escrow that then encrypts f of xy, but only f of xy. The verifier can verify that this escrow was computed correctly, and then there's a decryption algorithm that allows the auditor, but only the auditor, to learn f of xy, but nothing else. So that's the primitive that we want to use to guarantee accountability. So by the way, if you have any questions, I'm happy to be interactive. So there's something that is kind of missing here. I mean, this is a simplified kind of didactic presentation. So if anyone kind of sees what's confusing here, yeah.
Question then. This only works for the present, but it's not backwards. It cannot reveal information backwards, right?
Yes, so you're saying that if there were bad actions in the past, how can we investigate those? Yeah, so that's true. So one thing we do when we apply this, for instance, to the CBDC system called Paradise that we designed, so there we have a tracing key, which allows, so if you know that tracing key, you can see all the past transactions of a user. So what we can do is we can escrow the tracing key using a blueprint scheme, and then you learn that key, which allows you to see everything in the past as well. So that kind of, it's by kind of having a symmetric key that you then encrypt with the blueprint system, you can see everything. But that has the downside that it's maybe too much, right? So how to find the right trade-off so you can look somewhat in the past, but not too far, and you cannot look into the future in case the suspect was actually innocent. So there is future work that can be done there. Yeah, so it's a good point. Mm-hmm. In one of the examples, X is a list, yeah. So it depends on what the function f is. So we give an efficient instantiation for X being a list, yeah.
Okay, but then when you write public key of X, it's kind of it hides the complexity of X. X is a list of people or
yes, so if you would have to add dummy values if you want to hide the size of the list.
But like, is it a fixed size in general, or it depends on the representation of X?
It depends on the size of the public key. So the public key would be kind of linear in the size of the list typically. But it can be like an arbitrary big list.
Just normally when you talk about public keys, it's a fixed thing like RSA or something, but here it's something which depends on the domain.
It depends on X, yeah. That's right. And that's somewhat inherent because it needs to encode that information.
Sure, so you have something in mind how you encode X.
Yes, I think so. You can encode X also as in a computational way to kind of say everyone that is older than 21, for instance, is a target. So that would then be a more complex functions, but then indeed you can keep the public key smaller. But you need then, for instance, to use fully homomorphic encryption to implement it. So it's kind of, we don't have an efficient instantiation for kind of these succinct encodings of lists, for instance.
Okay, just one last thing. So if X is just one guy,
Mm-hmm.
do you have something very efficient in this case because you just have to check for it essentially one guy?
Yes, I think that it's more efficient, yeah. Yeah.
But not the user nor the verifier knows the size of X. I just want to know that is there any sort in key generation of the KPIs based on X? Because for the same X, maybe for the same X, just if there's no sort, then there should be always the same KPI, and that will lead to some attack. So is there any sort inside?
Any sort inside? Yes. Oh yeah, the key generation is of course randomized. So every time you run it, even with the same X, you get a different key and a different secret key and a different public key. That's right. Yeah. Maybe one more question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm slightly actually confused. So the user here is computing escrow of pkx, comma y.
Yeah.
So what is escrow? This function escrow. What does it do?
So it encrypts y with the public key x. I will get to that specifically. So it does like you can think of it as a two-party computation where it computes the first round of the two-party computation,
Okay.
which is then, or no, it's actually the second round. So computing the public key is the first round, and then computing that is the second round, and then decrypting it
And
is the
why
finalization.
is a message sent by the escrow?
Why the user sends it to the verifier? So the user creates the escrow and then sends it to the verifier.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Maybe it becomes a bit more clear. So one thing that I kind of elided here is how do we know that the y is a good y? The user could put any y there. So how do we trust the user to put his real y there? So that's kind of how we need to connect it to some other external system. So you would have to connect it to an anonymous credential system or to a DID, like a digital identity system, like, or to a payment system that has some notion of accounts or identities. And the way we do it is by using commitments. So we assume that there is a commitment to the user's y, and then the escrow takes actually the randomness of the commitment, or basically that allows us to recompute the commitment as input, and creates a proof that the y in the commitment is the same as the y in the escrow. And then using zero-knowledge proofs, we can tie all of those things together. So we can tie this to the currency system or to the identity management system, and so on.
Well, there's one issue that as a verifier knows the y and this random sort. So how can this mechanism prevent the verifier to spoof anything?
So the verifier doesn't know the y. He only knows the commitment and the escrow. So he doesn't get to see the salt R, for instance, the verifier only gets to see the kind of the commitments and the ciphertext. Yeah. So I think I will go a bit faster over the formal security notion, but we need like four properties for blueprints. One is blueprint hiding, namely that the public key hides the value X. It's a bit like semantic security for encryption. Then we need soundness, which says that if verify escrow verifies for a particular escrow and a particular commitment, for a public key to X and a commitment to Y, then the escrow really is an evaluation of F on X and Y. And we need privacy against auditors. And there are two types of auditors. One is if the auditor is honest, then we don't want anything to kind of be learned by anyone except for that auditor. So that means that f of xy is like a ciphertext that no one can decrypt except for the auditor. And then even if the auditor is dishonest, and he, for instance, if he reveals the secret key to everyone, or he then, it still does not reveal more than f of xy. And we will actually show that information theoretically, no more information than f of xy is contained in the escrow value. So this is, we define that using kind of a game-based notion, where we have the real world on the left and kind of a simulated world on the right. And the attacker can create arbitrary public keys for some X and some X values. And then we check that those public keys verify with respect to a commitment to X. So that's another way of how do we bind the X to some external systems, for instance, to search warrants. And so if that verification fails, then the game aborts. So we then, like, that the users, if that verification fails, users should never do an escrow. So users only produce escrows if that verification succeeds. So let's assume that that verification succeeds. Then the adversary can make users create escrows for some arbitrary values y and r prime of their choice, and users create escrows. So in the real world, those are the escrows that should now contain only f of xy. In the ideal world, we provide a simulation algorithm, a bit like in zero knowledge, to define zero knowledge, and that simulation algorithm only learns f of xy and nothing else, which kind of models that all this simulated escrow can reveal is f of xy. And so the security against dishonest auditors is now, you cannot distinguish those two. So now we come a bit to constructions. So the recipe is that it's like a passively secure, non-interactive secure computation of the value f, where the auditor provides the first message and the user provides kind of the second message based on the first message, and from that you can learn f of xy. And then we compile this passively secure scheme using non-interactive zero knowledge and commitment schemes into the full blueprint scheme. We have two constructions. One is for all functions using fully homomorphic encryption, where the passively secure scheme is just evaluating things on homomorphic ciphertexts. And we have an efficient one for this watch list scheme, where you have encryptions, where the public key basically contains ciphertext that correspond to suspects, and you do matching against those suspects, and that we realize using Elgamal and Diffie-Hellman assumption using a quite efficient scheme. So this is how we construct it. So key generation of the list of suspects contains the values xi, which are like suspect names, and we compute a polynomial that has xi as its roots. And the property is then that if you evaluate that polynomial on an actual, on someone that is in the watch list, then it will relate to 0. And then we kind of add the identity of the user to this 0 value, which then reveals it. If the user is not on the watch list, then it evaluates to some non-zero value, and we multiply it with a random s to turn it into something completely random. And then if we add this completely random thing to y, it will still be random. And that's kind of what gives us the security. So what I described here is trivially not secure because I just reveal the coefficients which encode the polynomial, which reveals basically what its roots are. So to make it secure, we encrypt everything. So we generate an Elgamal key pair, and we encrypt the coefficients of the polynomial, and then we do an encrypted evaluation of polynomials. So that's basically our construction. So we have two follow-up works. One is updatable blueprints. And that the idea here is that we don't want to just have a single kind of action of the user that is investigated, but many actions of the user. So, and then you can think of it as an accumulated credit score of the user, and you only get kind of de-anonymized, investigated if your credit score, your suspiciousness score gets too big. So the predicates of an updatable blueprint scheme will be over kind of the sum of the suspiciousness score. And we also have another paper that optimizes kind of blueprints. We call it Olympic blueprints because it came out at the time of the French Olympic Games. And so we make it both faster by kind of compressing the size of the escrow proof. We have bigger functionality. We can now encrypt the keys for CBDC systems that someone asked about. So we can do backward tracing with that system. And we also have stronger security because we prevent frameability. So in the original system, if the auditor and a malicious user collude, they could frame an innocent user and could say the innocent user did something bad while he didn't actually do something bad. It was just the auditor and the malicious user colluding. So we define security against that mechanism. So, so a bit more about updatable blueprints. So the predicate here is a predicate on a value by the investigator. Here it's a threshold on the credit score, and the sum of the increments that were done on the suspiciousness score. So that's one of the predicates. We can have other predicates that also support more complex functionalities. So then, I mentioned Olympic blueprints, the non-framing property, and we think that this one, because it allows us to encode actual tracing keys for kind of payment systems, is particularly suited for centrally banked digital currencies. And a future work would be to do retroactive tracing or investigations where we can specify specific intervals that are worth investigating. And also what kind of very interesting work would be is to integrate this work into actual systems or to integrate it into like systems like Paradise or anonymous credential systems to define the kind of a whole system which employs blueprints in certain aspects. Good, so wrapping up a bit about this line of work, I can say a bit more about other areas I work on afterward. So we have the motivation to kind of find a good trade-off between privacy and accountability, and also the accountability of the Watchmen. So they need to prove, and if they do an investigations, they have this public key with the hidden X. They need to prove that this is actually justified, that they run this investigation. So we can find trade-offs, and what we really need is kind of to fix the function f and how we certify x and y and what the requirements are for transactions to be kind of accepted under certain conditions. So we give strong simulation-based security notions and efficient constructions. So that's blueprints. So zooming out a bit to kind of the bigger state of the world. So I like this image of the Leviathan, which is like political science from the 18th century, which is like saying that, well, human beings are inherently bad. We need someone who has the monopoly of violence in a way that fixes things. So that's the Leviathan. And in the modern world, kind of what that kind of centralized system controls is our data. And the data comes like from all our devices. So that's kind of the place where I kind of almost, the current point in history. But what I would like to move towards is one where we kind of protect ourselves from overreach also by that kind of central party by building privacy-enhancing systems that are secure by design. I think there are several such systems like Aleo or AdStack have been discussed, and I think this would also be good systems for implementing blueprints or extending blueprints with. There is a system called Midnight in IOG that I'm also contributing to, and it has this vision of having smart contracts that have both an unshielded part and the shielded part, where the shielded part is kind of protected by zero-knowledge proofs, so you only kind of reveal properties about those things, so kind of building blueprints on top of that, integrating it with Midnight would be a very nice thing. There are also lots of other systems that this could be used with, also in the Ethereum ecosystem, I would say. Yeah, so I've not done this alone, so I have some collaborators even in the room, but I'm also grateful to my PhD students, my postdocs, and other colleagues at Edinburgh and elsewhere. So this is just the Zero Knowledge Lab. And yeah, I think there are 5 minutes for questions. I have a nice research map of things that I worked on before. I think when I got invited, I actually was asked to talk about TLS and formally verifying the TLS protocol. And I think that is also kind of related to this topic, because if we build such a system that has like a privacy by design system with this investigation powers, we need to make sure that there are no bugs. So formal verification plays a big role there as well. Yeah, so I also created this research map of all the things that I think should happen and that we should work on. But yeah, I think I can stop here. And yeah, some of them are related to blueprints, others are just doing other things.
Thank you very much, Markulf. Thank you very much. And in case you have any questions, please raise your hands. Any questions to the speakers? Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Could you please go back to the slides where you basically draw the verifier user?
Yeah, let's go to one of them. Mm-hmm.
That's, yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I think there was the pictures, right?
Yeah. Before that. Sorry.
Yeah, there's one.
Yeah, so my question is the PKX actually from the auditor also somehow sent to the verifier, or is it only,
Yes.
verifier only obtained from user? Okay.
Yeah, it needs to be sent to the verifier as well. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, because otherwise the user could create its own and cheat. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I just wondered, because this is non-interactive, so is it possible that like the auditor actually send out multiple PKX to the verifier, and then user Y just kind of like pick one of the PKX, well, just regardless how they manage to know some of the others, just pick one such that the polynomial is verified to a non-zero point, and then send it to the verifier. So the verifier kind of like takes the encrypted fxy from the user, where the user computed from their own y, but with a different PKX. And yeah, the verifier, when it verifies, it can verify the PKX is correct, but at the same time, it just kind of mismatch so that the user can trick to...
Yeah, so I think it at any given time, probably it should be one public key that, that is valid. Or when the user could also be kind of asked to create multiple escrows with respect to different public keys. There could be multiple auditors, for instance, that each have their PKX that they want to use for investigations, and the user has to create an escrow for each of them, for instance. But you're right, so if the user manages to kind of use the PK that where he's not a suspect, then he manages to evade investigation. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the questions. Any other questions? We have a minute or two for the last. Seems like not the case. Thank you very much then for your speech, and thank you for listening.